This is the Average Guy Network, and you have found Home Gadget Geeks, show number 609, recorded with Gretchen Schoenstein, recorded on May 23rd, 2024. Here on Home Gadget Geeks, we cover all the favorite tech gadgets that find their way into your home. News, reviews, product updates, and conversation. Tonight, a lot of conversation, all for the average tech guy. I'm your host, Jim Collison, broadcasting live from the AverageGuy.tv studios here in a beautiful Bellevue, Nebraska. Although it's raining every other day, everything's green. We're under flash flood warnings again for tonight, which is just kind of crazy. We had a drought for a while, but it's over now. And of course, we'll post a show with some world-class show notes out at the AverageGuy.tv. Big thanks to Marv B, who joined me last week. Always great to have Marv on the program. Caught up on some email and some listener feedback. Appreciate that. Marv had a good question for me. Is the PC dead? And so if you haven't listened to that, you can go back and listen to it. 608. Available now, Marv. Thanks for joining us. And big thanks to our Patreon subscribers as well. If you're on the Patreon team, thank you. And if you're not and you want to be, no pressure. Head out to the AverageGuy.tv/Patreon. We've got one plan. You can jump on the team if you want 1 month or multiple months, and appreciate that as well. All right, you heard from her a little bit earlier, but Gretchen Schoenstein is with me. Gretchen, always great to be with you. First time on Home Gadget Geeks. Welcome.
Yes, I appreciate that. I'm excited to be here and be with everybody.
You've said a couple times to me, I don't know if I have a lot of gadgets. And I'm thinking you actually probably have more than you think. So we'll have to dig those out of you tonight.
Yes, I actually realized as you said that, I went, oh, you know what? I have a retro gadget that might be kind of fun to talk about.
It's those things, I think
that I refuse to give up.
I think we've gotten so used to, the typical gadgets. Listen, I've been doing this for 13 years. I think 13 years ago when we started Home Gadget Geeks, the gadget space was still pretty thin, and when you had one, it was a big deal. But everybody has a smartphone today. Everybody has or had a computer or a laptop, right? We used to talk about those things like they were a big deal. Nobody talks about them anymore because they've kind of just woven themselves into the fabric. You probably have a smart TV, right? And you don't even think about it. The last TV you bought probably has a Roku or something built into it. It's probably a smart TV of some kind, right? Your car probably has auto navigation, right? You got an Apple CarPlay or Android, whatever they have, right?
Now I can't imagine without it.
Right. Yeah. Gretchen, let's get to know you a little bit. Let's go back. If you had a few minutes to introduce yourself to somebody you were just meeting, you got a whole audience of folks who've never met you before. What's your self pitch? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Ooh, my self pitch. Okay. So I've actually been in the leadership and talent development world for 20 years. Everything I've done has been in that leadership realm. So I helped, probably the biggest thing is I helped found an organization where we train women to run for office. And I was the founding executive director of the very first inaugural state. And I stayed with that organization for many years in many different roles. So everything from founding executive director to trainer of other executive directors, moved on, helped found the national organization, served as the chair, the vice chair, the secretary on the board, and then also went to all our other states. We're in about 27 states, and I did everything from first day training to board retreats to fundraising speeches to all sorts of different kinds of training. So I spent a lot of time in that realm, and this simultaneously worked for various talent development, professional development type organizations. And so I've worked with everything from nonprofits to corporations to startups to finance to insurance to tech, you name it. I've worked with folks at all levels of their career. And at this point, I now have my own company that I founded and called Finish Line Moments. And this is what I do. Got to a point where I was like, okay, I've learned a lot. I've done a lot for other groups, and now it's time to do my own thing. So
lot of folks may be thinking, oh, we're going to do a leadership pod. No, actually not. No,
No,
not at all. There's another
no.
great story in this. So don't
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
anywhere.
Don't go anywhere.
Don't go anywhere. Although that stuff is great. Full disclosure, you're a Gallup certified strengths coach. That
Yes.
is the thing I do for my day job. I know you
Mhm.
because of that. We've spent some time over the last couple of years talking, and I've kind of followed your journey in most part because you're a runner.
Yes.
And we started talking about running, and I had run most of my 40s and then into my 50s. It had not been something I had done when I was younger, and I was never a very good runner. I mean, in elementary school they called me square wheels, so I was pretty slow. Right.
I got the biggest klutz award in sixth grade.
Okay.
So
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I still have it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so I came to running late. Anyways, that was our connection. We talked about that. We happened to do a lot of work together too, from a Clifton Strength standpoint. Ken in the chat says, nice save, Joe. So yeah. No, it's okay. I do that for my day job, and maybe eventually sometime you'll hear Gretchen and I talk about that on the day job type of thing. But Gretchen, I wanted to bring you on tonight because I just loved your story. You know, you did something that I think a lot of people could do. They choose not to. But you came at it from a little bit of a disadvantage, right? When we talk about the goal that you had, we'll talk about that here in a second and what you actually got done. I think it's one thing to say those things, and I want to save that a little bit here because if you would talk a little bit about you've had some challenges with your health. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about those struggles?
Absolutely. So I am someone who lives with, at this point, at least 4 autoimmune diseases since I was about 9 years old. And that manifests in lots of different ways. And anybody who knows somebody, and that is increasing, with an autoimmune disease, it can be an often very frustrating, long, lonely, also frustrating, yes, I said it twice for emphasis, journey to get to that diagnosis. And so, one of the things I've thought a lot about is as a kid, I spent a lot of times, like an inordinate amount of time in doctor's offices and hospitals, to the point where I was actually quite comfortable. And it's only in reflection where I'm like, no kid should be that comfortable in a doctor's office or a hospital. But when you're just in them as often as I was, you don't really know any different. And so, being an athlete, including being a bit of a klutz, was never really my thing. And so I wasn't a runner. I wasn't, an athlete. I would admire them. I loved sports. I interned in college at the local sports radio station, and I worked for the Seattle Supersonics. And I'm still waiting for them to come back, but that's a different podcast. I really actually
sorry to bring up that pain. Yeah, sorry.
Honestly, side note, I think sometime in the next 6 to 8 months, we might have an announcement. So that we get an expansion team again. So I digress. Sports was something that I didn't really participate in because I never knew what challenge I would be faced with my health. And so in 2006, I was felled by my 3rd autoimmune disease. And the short version is that it basically blew up my joints and my lungs, which you would need to run. And so I couldn't walk for about 6 weeks. I ended up in the hospital for 8 days on a morphine drip. Not going to lie, the morphine drip, that part was actually kind of fun. It also, besides the fact that it takes away the pain, and they of course made the mistake of giving me the
pump.
Button
the button. It makes me sick to my stomach. So I don't.
Yeah. Well, they sent me home because of what was going on. They actually sent me home with like a year's prescription of the morphine, which I never took because I had a very different reaction to pill form versus the pump, which was, really just to take I've always used the word exquisite to describe the pain. And sometimes people kind of push back on that. And to me, what it means is it's this it's unlike any other pain I'd ever felt before. It was intense and exquisite. It was this all encompassing, like it changes your world as you're in it. And so, so doctors said, you're one of the things as I'm going through this whole process there in San Francisco, at some point during the prognosis, here's what to expect. And all the medications that I was on, they said, you're never going to run again. And I said, that's okay. I'm not a runner. You're not taking anything away from me. I didn't really think about it all that much. But what was interesting is I did go into kind of living this fear-based life a little bit. And so for the next few years, anytime, I still went to the gym and things like that. But I remember distinctly there would be days where I would like feel sore from something. And before this had happened, it would be like, oh, maybe I spent too much time on the stair climber. But then after this, it was like, oh no, it's back. So it became for a number of years, it was this almost fear-based way to live, that I'm just bracing all the time for something to happen until I decided to make a big goal in 2010. But those couple of years of, flare-ups and diagnoses and them telling me, this is what to expect. This is your new life.
Yeah.
It was not a way I would recommend anybody to live, but I was doing the best I could with what I knew at the time.
Sure. Yeah. Cards you've been dealt. Right.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Do you think, as you think about, you've been working with this or some form of it since you were a kid, and then you spent a lot of time in doctor's offices. As an adult, you spent a lot of time with it. We're going to talk about some outcomes here in a second, but has the way they've treated it changed over the last 3 decades as you've gone through with this? And what kind of changes have you seen? Is there better treatments today for this than there were before? Do we understand it better? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I would love to, because one of the organizations that I'm connected to is the Benaroya Research Institute in Seattle. And I have spent a lot of time recently, which I know we'll get to, specifically doing some work for them. And I first learned about them in 2014. The way autoimmune diseases are typically approached nowadays, or up until recently, is they were studied separately. So you'd have people studying in multiple sclerosis, MS, people studying rheumatoid arthritis, RA, studying type 1 diabetes, studying lupus, and they didn't always necessarily talk to each other. So advancements in treatment, let alone is there a cure out there, is slow going when they're all separated like that. And, the reality is that most people, when they are diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, what we know is right now, there is no cure. What you do is you manage it, right? You hope that you get good doctors that you can talk to, and you manage lifestyle, you manage pain, you manage flare-ups. And it's going to look different for everybody. So it's like, even just that is difficult because, I have had people reach out to me with some of my diseases and they're like, this is what I'm facing. I'm like, wow, I went through this, right? Even though it's the exact same diagnosis. So it's tricky, right? Because it's the immune system. It is, yeah. And what's interesting, and to your point about advancement, just one small aspect is, 5 years ago, they were saying over 80 identified autoimmune diseases. Now the language is over 180 identified autoimmune diseases. So there is the knowledge is being expanded every year in terms of what constitutes an autoimmune disease, how it affects the immune system. So what I love about Benaroya Research Institute, instantly when I found this out about them, is, and I have full permission from them to describe it the way that I do, because I'm not a researcher or a scientist. So I'll use like the basic layman's terms, is essentially, it's like, get all the researchers in a room together and talk to each other. Right. So if you start talking to each other, maybe lupus will find some sort of aha in their research work, and they can immediately share it with the researcher doing type 1 diabetes. And the idea is, well, it's all the immune system. It's all connected. So why not talk to each other, right? And cross-function research and communication around that, because otherwise you're spending all this time, red tape going through, I've got to apply for money to apply to ask for the research from a different organization. And so this way, getting everybody in the room together, they've been able to advance both the understanding of the immune system. One of the things that I love is they study the healthy immune system and an immune system that is affected by autoimmune diseases, so that they can understand where that happens and why it happens. And so BRI really gives me hope that by studying these diseases together, trying to figure out, hey, if MS finds a cure, how quickly could we find a cure for lupus? Yeah. Right. And so they're saying language like we could cure RA in the next 10 to 15 years. We could find I know there's research out there that's all experimental, but it all leads to innovation and possibility. Right. And so there's some work being done around type 1 diabetes. Like, again, you ask anybody with T1D or anybody with RA, and they've never been told there's a possibility for a cure in their lifetime. And now I believe that there is.
Wow. No, it's exciting to just you say that. My oldest sister has lupus. Okay. Recently diagnosed in the last 2 years, and is really, really, really struggling with it right now. Ken says autoimmune disease is no joke. Great illustrated description, Gretchen. It's all encompassing. And then he also says exactly, access to quality care is a game changer. Do you use any technology to help manage what you're going through? I think about some of the workouts I've been doing. I have a new workout partner that we've been doing a lot of stairs together, and we actually track our heart rate at the top and at the bottom and time, and like it's never been an easier time to track all those kinds of things. Right. From a health standpoint, are you able to take advantage of some of those technologies that may exist on a watch or what have you?
It's funny you should say that. I actually have just recently started thinking about getting an Apple Watch. So I've been wearing a Fitbit for, a decade. And when I was going to make a silly joke about, well, most of the gadgets that I use for my health are big MRI machines and CAT scan. Those my gadgets are found at the hospital. But I'm constantly monitoring. And one of the things I've thought a lot about this spring as I've been going through this big project that I did is it's really struck me how I don't know how to do life any different, right? Like, this is my life, right? And so I forget that the way I do things is just part of how I do them. They're not new to me. They are just incorporated into my life. So I don't really, people are like, oh my God, it must be so exhausting to, manage these different diseases or to like constantly be aware of what you put in your body and I'm like, nah, it's not exhausting. That's just what I do. It's just how I exist. So, but there are, I'm always, I track my steps because I have figured out over time, for example, with my doctors, that for me, leaning on the edge of high movement, even though I was told for years to have almost no movement, it's actually been something that's helped me reduce flare-ups. Now, there's a dark side to that too, because with too much movement, I can definitely inspire a flare-up, and I've had some in the last couple of years that I know where they came from, but it's that balance of the more movement, which is why I'm always tracking it, the healthier and more. Honestly, it's physical as well as mental, because I want to feel like I'm in as much control as I can be over this. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. We live at a time when you can have real granular control in some regards, at least on the tracking side of things. I mean, you could literally track your heart rate, your VO2 max, your steps, your, the workouts. I've turned on the "How are you feeling today" side of the Apple Watch, where twice a day it asks me, "Hey, how are you feeling?" and it gives me some options, and then you can kind of track that over time.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, something like that. You would decide. You said, I want to get to this part. I don't want to talk about the other stuff anymore. You said your doctor said you're never going to run again, which is ironic in some regards.
Right.
And you kind of said, talk me through that. When somebody says that, and then you opted to do the opposite.
Not right away.
No.
So I did.
Talk through that. Yeah.
Yeah, I believed them. Right, because they're the experts. And it's interesting because one of the things I have thought about is going back to some of the doctors from the beginning and saying, hey, not to make them wrong, but more like, of course, they haven't seen me since the more acute stage because I went on to do other things. So there's part of me that's wondered if I can go back and say, here's another option for when someone presents like me. Yeah. Right. And so at first I just believed them and chose to almost a tacit agreement of like, oh, okay, I'm going to live this smaller life, a lot in fear because my body was still really battling me. And then something kicked in a couple years later, and it became all about defiance and doing things the opposite of what the doctor said.
It's like on Seinfeld when George Costanza says, "I'm just going to do everything the opposite," and he has all the success. Gets a girlfriend. He gets hired by the New York Yankees. So get us to that point. So what did you decide to do, and what'd you do?
So a couple years later, there's a lot of things going on in life, and both personally and professionally. And I was kind of in this, I've often talked about this, I was a little bit in a free fall and recognized very quickly that I needed something bigger to aim for, something bigger to train for. And so I decided to run a half marathon against doctor's orders, against the advice of pretty much everybody in my life, of course. And this from distance running, most people were saying to me, how about a 5K? Like, do you got to go so big? Right. 13.1 miles is significant. Mm-hmm. You have to train for it. And so, but I needed that bigger than me, bigger than life, bigger than what I'd been carrying, because of my health for all those years. And so I ran a half marathon, and it was not easy. The training and the getting up the hills, my half marathon was in San Francisco. It was probably about 2 miles from the hospital I'd been in. So it felt very symbolic. It was, I had to change the way I eat. I had to change the way I approach things physically. I really had no idea how it was going to go. Thankfully, a good friend of mine who was a runner decided to run it with me. And when I started out at that start line, it was like, I'm just going to see what's possible, which is a running theme, pun intended, throughout everything. And I ran that half marathon in awe that I was doing it in the first place. Mm-hmm. And I still have this picture coming down the last hill towards the finish line with both arms up, very Rocky at the top of the stairs type of thing, right? And not on purpose. Like, it just was very organic and happened in the moment. And I got to that finish line and I crossed it and I just dissolved. Because it was just, oh my God, I actually did it. I'm not supposed to be able to do these things. And it opened up this whole thing for me of what else is possible. If I can do that in defiance and in, a lot of belief, regardless of what people were saying to me. Even then I had a Garmin, so I was, still checking that. Now I talk to my Garmin all the time. I was thinking about that. I was like, it'll say, I'll have a good run and it'll say, in recovery. I'm like, I yell at my watch. I'm like, no, that was a better run. That's not in recovery. What?
Yeah.
And then there's other times where I like have the world's most terrible run and it says productive. I'm like, okay, if you say so, I'll take it. But it really, that first one, it really was a defiant run. Like if I were to put an emotion on it, it was defiance, in a good way, in a healthy way.
Well, you mentioned two things, like doing something bigger than yourself, right? And in some regards for you, that was the impossible. And I too, when I first started running, 5K was a long way, and then got that done. And I thought, maybe I can run a 10K. And I remember I got done with that. I'm like, wow. And I remember one Saturday I was running with some friends and we ran a 10K, and I said, they were like, you want to do it again? And you have a little bit of the runner's high going on. You're like, yes.
Yeah.
And I ran 2 back-to-back 10Ks, and you're like, oh, like
right.
We could run a half. Now, for me, that led to a full, and that led to 5 fulls. And, I kind of got caught by that bug. I would never do that again. Do you think, would you recommend, someone hears a story like this and they're like, I'm going to be defiant and go against my doctor.
Right.
You've been doing this for a while. You've been talking to people for this for a while. What do you say to that? What do you tell people who are thinking like, what do I do? I'm in a pit. Like I'm in the pit of despair. What do I do? What are your thoughts on that?
It's, it's one, it's just going to sound corny, but it's what I believe. It's one step at a time. Right. Not everybody. I'm not out here saying everybody with autoimmune diseases should go be a runner by any stretch. Right. It's what can get you a little bit out of your comfort zone so that you feel a lot more possibility rather than, oh God, this diagnosis I just got, how do I manage this? Because it can feel, there's a lot of hopelessness. There's a lot of frustration. There's a lot of feeling alone when it comes to the autoimmune world. And a lot of confusion too. It's like, why is my body doing this? What's going on? And, there are some communities like I have found at BRI where I feel seen and heard, and I feel like I'm part of something hopeful. And so, there is doing things within reason. I'm certainly not advocating that, everybody go run a marathon, who is struggling. I do find I abide by a lot of quotes. And one of the ones that I really love is, break glass to make a mosaic. And that to me that's how I kind of approach it, because if I only listened to those very first doctors and didn't try things outside my comfort zone and pressure test a lot of different ways to do things, I never would have created the mosaic of the running journey that I've had. That's, much larger than even I could have pictured after that first half marathon.
Yeah. So you came down the hill, arms. Listen, I've got some pictures like that too of my first 10 miler, and then you quit, right? That was it. That's the end of the story.
Yeah,
you
I've
got
only run one half marathon.
Half marathon. Talk a little bit. So you decided to run more. So
I did. That first one felt incredible. Like that first one, it was like, I loved the defiance of it. It also felt hopeful and possible. And I wanted more of that. You talked about the runner's high. Certainly there's a lot of that. There's also a lot of, for me, I felt incredibly grateful that I could do it. And I wanted to feel more of that. I felt in awe. And, I think at this point, we've all read the studies that say, chasing moments of awe is an incredible way to live. And so I thought, okay, well, I want to do another one. Let me see if it was just a fluke. So I ran another one, and I'll speed this part up. At the end of that year, I ran 5. And totally.
What year, Gretchen? What year?
That was 2010. So okay. I ran 5 half marathons in 2010. And I had a lot of friends ask, like, how'd it go? What are you thinking now? And I made the mistake of saying it was easier than I thought it would be. Which then some of my friends said, oh, well, you should double it next year. And they were joking. don't joke with me about that kind of stuff because I would, very
No, I
likely
think
say, okay,
you and I are a lot alike in
yeah.
this regard. Somebody says, you could probably do twice as many, and they're joking, and you go like, yeah, I probably could. And then all of a sudden you start like thinking about these things,
Yeah,
right?
100%. And then of course I'm a numbers person. So the next year was 2011. And I thought, not only will I do 10, but I created this little campaign for myself called 11 and 11. Yeah. So I went from doing 5 to 11 and 11. And it was obviously a giant lift. It was big. But it felt bigger than me. I knew I was aiming for something. I started having conversations with people around my why, around getting out of your comfort zone, around what does it mean to set a goal? What does it mean to be resilient? I've always been about challenging myself and testing my abilities and my endurance. And I was testing my health too. I was testing these prognoses of, you got to kind of live this like half-baked life. And so it almost felt like research in a way, right? And I traveled all over the country. I ran in, everywhere from Miami. My God, that was hot. That was a hot race. It was December. It was hot. Yeah. Things you remember about these races. And I started writing about them too. So the first number of years that I ran, I wrote about them endlessly. And so then, by the end of 2011, I've got 16 half marathons under my belt. I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Still no big giant goals of numbers of anything like that. Just like, wow, I can't believe I did 16. And then had to dial it back in 2012. So this is, if you look at the last many years of it, every year is a little bit different. So I dialed it back in 2012 and I think I got to 22 races. So now I'm like in the 20s and I'm thinking, maybe there's something more here. I had a flare up in 2012. And so it made me kind of reassess, how do I approach this? How do I make adjustments? And that's actually one of my mantras now when I get to a start line is I just say to myself, everything I need is within me and I can adjust when I need to. Because of the experience that I have. Like if there's any one person who's going to trust my body, it should be me. And so flash forward to 2016 and I'm staring down the last of the 50th half marathon. And that's when things really shifted for me. They still felt like very personal Defiance type races in those years. And then in 2016, I thought, I've got to do more. I need something bigger than me and something that has more impact. And so I actually founded an organization called Operation Shooting Star. The founder, she has MS, her dad had RA, and she had this idea of cure one to cure all. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to make this a fundraiser and I'm going to raise money for Operation Shooting Star. She has become one of my dearest friends. She ended up coming out to the finish line of the 50th half marathon. We raised a bunch of money. And the following year, we were able to donate it. Her doctor at the time was at University of Maryland. And then because we were in Baltimore, we also went to Johns Hopkins. And at that point, my brain was so full of trying to desperately understand the science and research around autoimmune diseases that I knew we were part of something bigger. And that felt incredibly satisfying. And so for all these races, it's been, what more can we do? How can we, raise money so that we can raise awareness and research dollars? And so every time I would, be fearful, every time there was something where I was like, oh my God, how am I going to be able to do this? I would remember there's magic on the other side of fear, right? Like the stories that we would get from people, the conversations we had with people as we were, packing all this up together. And then, for me, it was, now it's a journey of resilience because I have a flare up. When do I push? When do I let off the gas pedal? I'm always having that conversation. And she and I had a lot of conversations around that too, of like, there's days where it tells you to rest. Is that actually the day you've got to push?
Yeah.
Or is that the day you go, oh yeah, today's a rest day?
Mm-hmm.
And there's no perfect answer to that one. I get it wrong all the time. And I've been doing this for years.
Do you have doctors who are supporting you at this point in doing this? I mean, obviously you had one that's like,
right.
Don't do
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
Have you found a community or a doctor that is willing to work with you at this point on this?
That's a great question. Absolutely. And that is part of the autoimmune journey that we're on, is finding the right doctors, finding people who will be advocates for you, who will figure out how you can do what it is that you want to do. And the doctors that I work with at this point, you know, I've had some doctors say to me, like, I've learned I will not be the one to say no. And so we will figure out how to make this work for you. So there's lots of there's adjustments I have to make to my medication. And that I get, you know, like people are like, oh God, I've never got my blood drawn. I'm like, I literally could fill up a stadium with all of the blood draws I've had. You know, there's somebody's like, oh, I'm new at putting a needle in. I'm like, oh, just right here and just put it this way. It's no big deal. So, you know, it's the things we get used to. So, but so much of it is, you know, kind of pressure testing who's going to support you. Mm-hmm. And recognizing that there will always be adjustments, because what worked for my body in 2016 is different than 18, which is different than 2022, which is different than now. And for me, one of my favorite signs that I see at races that really keeps me going and always gets me a little verklempt when I see it is there will be a day that you cannot do this. Today is not that day. Right. And that I hold on to that one. That is, you know, one of my favorite signs. And so it's about finding the right doctors. And sometimes, you know, it's just like those things of like people come into our life for a season. I think of my doctors that way. You know, there's some doctors that like we're great partners for a couple of years, and then I have to move on because I need something a little bit different. Perfect example is when I was getting ready for number 75. So flashing forward another few years. And still working with Audrey. But at this point, I had let her know about Benaroya Research Institute that I had found in 2014. And we'd arranged to give money to BRI from Operation Shooting Star, raising it for number 75. And I ran number 74. And then a week later, I was in the hospital and hooked up to double IVs, which I'm used to. Taking care of infection and pain and, you know, all the inflammation. And I have two doctors at the end of my bed in that hospital saying, oh yeah, you're not running number 75 in 2 weeks. And I couldn't really get the words out because of the morphine. But I said something like, sure.
Right.
And then the checkup doctor a week later, he was the one who said, I'm not going to be the one to tell you no. And I did run it. And the reason I ran it, because I was skin and bones and probably shouldn't have run it, but because we were raising money, there were people that were counting on us. And it felt so much bigger than me that, you know, I went to San Antonio and, you know, got a little teary at the start line, realizing what I just gone through to get there. And ran the race. And the next spring we were in Seattle donating this, you know, big old Price is Right check. And one of the researchers who had gone on a tour of the facility just a few weeks earlier stands next to me and he said, I just want you to know sarcoidosis is on our list next. And that's one of my autoimmune diseases. And I was like, oh my God, telling our stories matters. Especially in this autoimmune world. And because it was just this passing comment, the story that I'd shared with him a couple of weeks earlier. And that's the impact that I'm trying to build with, you know, running more than 75 half marathons at this point.
Easy to share the stories of success because, you know, you get to 75 and it's like, a big check. Have there been moments when it's failed on you, your body's failed you, and you're like, yes, I have a run planned, yes, I've got people counting on me, but I just can't do it. Has that happened to you?
Yeah, so they're called DNS, did not start. I've had quite a few DNSs, races I've signed up for that I just was unable to do. Travel automatically brings inflammation, and I do travel a lot. Right. And so I have had some flare-ups where, there's a race this weekend and I'm like, I'm not running it. Like, it doesn't matter that I paid the fee, the entry fee or what have you. And so there's definitely been some races I haven't been able to do. There's been races where I've walked most of it. But I always believe that every step counts, and every step is a gift. So, however I get to the finish line, I've yet to have a DNF, which is did not finish.
Right.
I've yet to have that, because once I'm in it, it's like something takes over. And even if I have to like somersault across the finish line, I will find a way to do that. But I tell this to people all the time, I can do everything right and I can be fully prepped and things still go wrong, whether it's on a race where I feel like this is my day, or just in general, and when I overdo it, I pay for it. So, I got to number 89 in early 2020, pre-pandemic days. And that year was going to be my 100th half at the end of the year, and got to number 89. And then, pandemic hit, everything shut down, and there were no races for 18 months, like no start lines, no finish lines, no nothing, no medals. And that threw me big time, because that was something that had become such a part of my life. I mean, after 89 half marathons, right? Yeah. There's a routine, there's a habit, there's a goal, there's a push, there's a reason you're doing this at all. And I ended up not running even a mile for 4 months, which may not sound like a long time to non-runners, but when you are a runner, consistency is key. And not running for those 4 months, partly because I was terrified to be outside because of my autoimmune and pre-existing conditions. And those that first year of the pandemic, even my own friends and family were terrified to be around me. It was incredibly isolating, because it was like, oh my God, we don't want to get you sick. I'm like, oh, okay. Zoo animal at this point, but I can laugh at it now, but it sucked, right? It was very isolating. And so it was actually Benaroya Research reached out to me and they asked me how I was faring, and they wanted to write an article about it. Like, as a runner, we know you. How are you doing with all of these races gone? And it motivated me to start a little bit of running. So for about 3 months, I ran a mile. And I wouldn't let myself run anything more than that. And I'll be honest, I still remember that first time when I walked out my door, my hand was shaking as I closed my door. Like, as I watched my hand on the doorknob, it was so nervous to go for a run, even for a mile. But I kept the goal small so that I felt like I could do it again. So I really but it wasn't until I got to the point where I started getting anxious about, I want to run more than a mile, that I finally let myself. It wasn't just because it was a good run. I really paced myself for those few months to do that. And I think that's what was like this gentle reintroduction to running that worked for me.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned this a little bit earlier, in this story, I want to be careful. Listen, we're talking to people who have family members who have autoimmune problems or whatever. Yeah. Fill in the blank, challenges, whatever they happen to be, or they themselves are struggling with that. And sometimes with a story like this, you tend to you came at it from a running perspective.
Yeah.
But it's not always. I think it's more about grit. I think it's more about figuring out that thing for you. We talk a lot about this in the strengths world, right? Of how are you built? What are you good at? And how can you take advantage of those things? Right? Now, you found out like, hey, even though they're advising me not to do this, I think I can. And I think I'm going to try. I think I'm going to get past this. Talk a little bit about, as you think about your own grit you've been doing this, you've been at this for 15 years at this point, thinking, 20, if we use 2010 or 2009 as a starting point for you, and now you've run well over 100. How many half marathons are you up to now?
The reveal of how many. So I am at 123 half marathons. Okay. As I said, there was a gap of 18 months. Yeah. The races came back at the end of 21, and I ran number 90. And that was, whoo, boy, you talk about emotion. Oh, yeah. That was like, there's a video of me that we then also took still snapshots of. And it's just it's like, there's emotion at a finish line. And then there's like, I need to walk into a field and like take a knee. I understand. Right. And that's what that one was. It was because it was this, I'd had this big dream of 110 years, and that dream got deferred. And then it was like, now I don't even know if I can run at all. And that came back. And so there was this grand satisfaction around that. And then I decided, because I'm stubborn, that I still wanted 110 years with the asterisks, because there were no races. It wasn't me not doing the races. Right. So I did 11 half marathons in 4 months. And that was a drive that I couldn't repeat it today. I was still, like, in hindsight, I have no idea how I did it, but I did it because I had this big goal. I wanted to get to 100. Ended up being in my hometown. Friends and family came in. I mean, it was this massive, bigger than even I expected it could be, celebration for it. And I immediately paid for it. Immediately paid for it. I spent most of 2022 in recovery. So what we figured out with my doctors is that doing 11 half marathons in 12 months, thumbs up, you can handle that. 11 half marathons in 4 months, now we're in the horseshoe effect, and we've actually caused me more harm. Right. And really, it's just been, people ask me all the time if I'm going to run a marathon, and it's just confirmation that I'll never run a marathon. That's actually too much. Yeah. So I'm always doing this adjustment of, like, the running community asked me, like, oh, what's your mileage per week? I'm like, I'm not the right person to ask that question, because every week's different for me. And I have to pay attention to that. Right. And so I did get to 100. 2022 was a whole series of recovery and even more DNSs. And then a bit of a comeback in 2023. I have found strength training, heavy strength training, heavyweight strength training in the last year. That's been a game changer. If you told me a few years ago that in the half marathon range of 115, I'm going to find a whole new way to do this activity, I wouldn't have believed you. But that's one of the things that I love about it. I'm still learning. Yeah. I have moments of awe in every single race, and I'm still learning, like, the adjustment piece of it. Yeah. And so I think from a grit standpoint, and why I'm still doing this, and why I'm still at the 123, still now up to 123. A big part of it is the moments of awe. There's never a time where I'm at a start line where I'm like, whatever. Every start line is, I can't believe I get to do this. I'm just so grateful, and I can't believe I get to do this. And so when I think about grit, I love that word. From the way I use it, I actually came up with an acronym using the word grit.
What is that? Can you do it? I
can. Yeah. G for gratitude, which is a key cornerstone for me. I mean, you find me on social media, Run Grateful. I mean, it's been my thing all this time because I am so grateful that I can do this at all, right? My literal mantra is every step is a gift, every mile an accomplishment, and every finish line a victory. Right. So if I reframe what this step looks like, if I reframe what this mile looks like, there's no failure. I'm out here. I'm doing it anyway. Right. So it's being very grateful for, as well as for the support that I've had, and for the ability to get up and do it again, fall down, get up and do it again. R is for resilience. I got a little bit of that.
Yeah, a little bit,
but it gets me into trouble. Like, I'll be honest, I have overdone it. I'm aware of that. But that's where the resilience can also be a little bit of resourcefulness. And then that moves into the I, which is for intention. So I don't do things without thinking them through. I'm very thoughtful about it. I rely on the routine, but I'm always willing to adjust. And I have to be intentional in my races. I have to be able to adjust in the moment. The race where you think, oh God, I got this one. This is going to be a PR. And 4 miles in, you're like, I just hope I can make it.
Yep. Yeah.
And you, if you're not intentional about it, the fact that it's not going to be the race that you thought it was going to be could totally derail you. Or you can be intentional about the next steps that you're taking and what else can you still get out of that race. And then the last one is, this is where grit comes from experience. The last one is trust, right? I'm able to trust that, like I said, my mantra of everything I have is within me. Everything I need is within me, and I can adjust when I need to. And I do trust that now.
Yeah. I love to hear both the success and the failure in this, because I think sometimes when we hear stories about this, it's the big check and the cross the finish line moments, which are exciting, right? I mean, they are equally exciting, but there's the moments of pain and the moments with IVs in both arms.
Yep.
Right. There's the moments with the doctors in the room who are like, what are you doing? Right. They look at you like, you're like, come on. Like,
right.
Do we know better? I mean, I'm sure you've heard that from the medical community 1,000 times. You know better than this.
Right.
You know what you're doing to yourself. That's, I think sometimes too, that's the hard side of grit is in areas where you hear from the folks that are closest to you, like, hey, maybe you should slow down a little bit. Maybe you should, maybe you should take it easy a little bit. And yet I think a lot of what you've done has been built around not just doing it for you. Listen, you can't see them, but I have a whole bunch of medals from all the running stuff that I've done. And it's, I brought them home and I stuck them on a thing and they sit there. But you've done this to raise money.
Yeah.
Right. You've done this for other people. I mean, I think of my sister who has lupus, and there may be for her, I mean, she's 10 years older than me. So she's in her mid 60s. There's still time. Like, there might be still time for her to figure some of this stuff out. Some of the money, some of the emphasis, some of the sunlight you brought on this might make a difference. If you were to, and you do this, but if you were to talk to a parent who had a child that was suffering from this now, or someone themselves who's, 22 and they're like, I've got an autoimmune disease and my life's over. What do you say? I mean, how do we help? Not just you saying this, but how do we help, or what do we say, or what are the right things to say in this case, or what kind of what would you tell us?
Yeah, I think for the person who's going through the diagnosis journey, is part of it is, of course, you're frustrated.
Yeah.
Of course, this is scary, because it is. So acknowledging that, not trying to push it away or bury it and let them have that frustration, because it is frustrating. And then I think another piece of it would be, once the acceptance comes, right? Because there is a resistance to it. Of course there is. But I spent a number of years really owning, who am I now? And that's where the running has come in, is it's who am I now? I'm a runner. I have autoimmune diseases and I can do hard things. Yeah. Both things can be true. So it's from the person who's the patient, it is, you have to be your own best advocate. You build a team around you of the people in your life who will support you. Because look, like you said, I have people who are like, you shouldn't be doing this. I don't talk to them as often, right? And also people who are uncomfortable with it. I understand that. At the same time, it's not my job to make it okay for you. I have to be taking care of my health and doing what I can to make a difference. And so you do have to be discerning about who are the people in your life on a regular basis who support you. you do have to be your own best advocate with your medical team. And it will adjust and it will evolve over time. And then, it's finding that gratitude in the small moments of the days that you do feel good, and the days that, maybe don't feel so good, but giving yourself credit for the days that you listen to the fact that you need to rest. Yeah. Right. And one of the things that, I did this big project in March called 2 halves, 2 coasts, 2 days, where I literally ran 2 half marathons, one in Washington, D.C., got on a plane that night to Portland, Oregon. And I ran 2 half marathons for the fact that March is Autoimmune Disease Awareness Month. And by far, in addition to raising good money, and we're not quite there yet, but in addition to that, the stories that I got to hear from other people who suddenly realize they're not alone in either their journey of diagnosis or the fact that they're managing something that maybe there's some stigma and some shame around it, or maybe there's just general frustration, or a lot of times autoimmune diseases don't necessarily present as obviously physical as other more obviously physical diseases, right? And so this, let me play tough, everything's fine. And then the stigma and the shame around even talking about it in the first, oh, you don't look sick, and all of those kinds of conversations I had with people. And then being able to then also educate them on who BRI is and why I'm raising money for them, and giving people a sense of hope that there's a large group of researchers not just trying to find a cure, but their whole goal is to predict, prevent, reverse, and cure. And so I truly believe, and again, they say, yeah, you can say it that way, that, there will be cures in our lifetime for diseases that a couple of years ago, they weren't even willing to say that. And also that if you are born now with a genetic predisposition for an autoimmune disease, there's a very good chance that you will never actually experience any symptoms because they'll be able to predict and prevent it.
Wow.
So we couldn't say that a few years ago. And so for me, I think as someone who's had autoimmune issues my whole life, even though I'm still going to have to manage them, I feel such joy and hope over what's possible.
Yeah.
That that's just a big piece of why I keep doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. You said, I think, an important phrase that you're not alone in this. And I think sometimes, I don't know if maybe it's the way I'm built. I don't know if I've ever had an ailment where I felt alone with it, but I remember, I had surgery back in December for an enlarged prostate. Most of the listeners here know that. I've shared that experience here. So it's no surprise to the listeners here. But as I started talking about this, you'd be surprised who came out of the woodwork on this, right? Who started saying, you know what, I've been suffering with this, but I didn't want to tell anybody. Right. I never met a stigma that I didn't like. Like I have no problem telling people, like, yeah, I got these problems. Right.
Right.
But just recently I heard a story of someone who said, hey, I had heard you talk about this. I had asked my partner. They went in and got checked, and they were just diagnosed with prostate cancer. And like, they would not have known that had I not said something, right? Had I not talked about it, had I not been open about it. Do you find, I hear that in you, like part of this mission is just debunking the stereotype. Which in some regards, I kind of think, why would people feel that way? But they kind of do. Some don't want to talk about it, right? Some. So good on you for, I think there needs to be some of us who are built in a way, and we'd say our strengths maybe are biased in this way. Yeah. To have the grit to suffer through it and then talk about it so other people don't feel alone, right? They're like, oh, wait a minute, somebody else is talking about it. It means I can maybe talk about it more and get whatever support I need. I don't know. Does that resonate with you?
Oh, 100%. I mean, doing this work with BRI in particular, I mean, I'm always trying to do something big in March for Autoimmune Disease Awareness Month. I'm not quite sure I'm going to do what I just did. I'm literally still in recovery 2 months later, which is,
but that's good to hear, though, Gretchen. You're saying, like, I could do this, but I'm actively struggling with it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I mean, we're still trying to recover. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes it's hindsight's 2020. And on some of these things, you're like, oh, yeah, I ran 100 marathons and it's great. But then you think it may not have been great.
Right.
And you still have to talk about it when it's not great. And you're kind of in that mode right now, right?
To me, I think that's one of the biggest pieces of this. And that's to your point around sharing the story. It's extremely vulnerable to do this. Yeah. I have shared more in particular over the last few months on social media than I had ever before. I was a little bit more curated about what I was willing to share. But when it became so much bigger, and I'd start to get messages from people, privately about, thank you so much for sharing this. This is what's going on with me. And then I would talk to, somebody in the airport, or the pilot that flew the plane from DC to Portland. His sister-in-law has RA, or some, the airline agent, or the people, because I had this great tank top that said 2 halves, 2 coasts, 2 days with a QR code on the back so that people could donate while I'm running, the whole thing. And the stories that I was gifted from other people, it was interesting. It wasn't just that I was carrying their stories with me as I ran those miles. It also felt, and I don't know that I realized this in the moment, but the more they shared with me, the braver I got about sharing. Yeah. Right? Because it felt like, okay, we're in this together.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the thing for you and I. We're okay out front. Right. We're okay. We wouldn't be doing this if we weren't, for the most part. Right. We're okay with that. But we're actually energized. Not everybody wants to, needs to, is designed to do that. But when we hear those stories, right? I mean, I'm all fired up right now. But when we hear those stories, it charges us up almost more than what we gave back, I think, in some ways. And I think this is that symbiotic relationship to this idea of, for those of us who are designed to be out front, you need to be out front, right? And for those of you who aren't, that's okay too. Sorry, I guess I gave an inadvertent thumbs up. For those of you, or maybe the universe was agreeing.
There you go. I'll take that. Yeah, that's good. I like that.
For those of us who aren't, that's okay.
Right.
We actually need you. Like, we need your support to continue to make awareness of these things, to be able to talk about these things. I mean, your 100 marathon or your 100 half marathons were done because there was a whole group of people who were behind you, encouraging you. This time we're saying things, you're inspiring me, or you're helping me, or, whatever. Right. I mean, that kind of fueled, it's not so much you. I mean, it is you deciding you're going to do this. That's a big part of it.
Yeah.
But you're also energized by those people saying those things. Right.
Oh my God. 100%. I had a woman at one of the finish lines just grab my arm and she said, this is legacy work. This is having an impact, because it was so obvious to her that I have all those medals too, 100%. And for me, I like having that tangible piece of knowing that I did it. And long ago, it became like, I still love getting the medal. There's a sense of completion with it. But I sometimes wonder, would I be at 123 half marathons if it were only about me? And I can honestly say I'm 100% sure that there's no way I would be, because it became about something bigger than me. And, the stories that I would get from people, and I now have people reaching out to me saying, oh, this person is going through a diagnosis journey. Would you be willing to talk to them? And it's like 4 people, once removed. So that feels so much more of a drive and so much more important to me And I had a reporter who picked up on the story in Portland, and she started the interview with, I picked up this story because of my sister and my mom. Yeah. And it's those types of moments where you're like, oh my God, there's so many more people out there dealing with autoimmune issues that have never had that either sense of hope or that person, please go speak for me, right? Go put yourself out there and we got your back. There's a purpose to it. And we know how important purpose is, right? Yeah. That's the drive.
Yeah. So it's what drives you for sure. There are several videos that were done on you about your back-to-back weekend. I'll throw those in the show notes for folks. Head out to theaverageguy.tv/HGG609 for this show. And I'll link those out there so you can watch those as well. I think they were done very well. I watched them all as I was getting ready to have you on here. You and I behind the scenes have been talking about this for a while. And then you were like, oh yeah. And I just Googled it and looked at it. I'm like, oh my gosh, she's actually a really big deal. Like we just been talking about it, and to see you on the news talking about it, but doing it in a way. And then I think with my sister being diagnosed with lupus and thinking through that, and then my own diagnosis with an enlarged prostate and the work that I had to go through with that as well has opened all these things to that. Now, we don't want to sit around and compare those things, but we all have our challenges, right?
For sure.
We all have those things that live out there, and that either we choose to let us consume us or we consume them in some ways. And Gretchen, final as we kind of wrap this up, it's been a great hour kind of with you. If you were to give any advice, and you probably have to do this, and I hate that thing because it's so general and you don't know who you're talking to, but final thoughts, maybe not, it's not advice. Final thoughts on this, just in the last 15 years as you've been doing this work, that's maybe not even running related, but related to you or what you learned through it.
Oh, I mean, I'm a big fan of the quotes that keep me happy and make me feel like, whether it's my mantras or what have you. And like and there's versions of this, but I just, I'm a huge basketball fan, as I mentioned earlier. So there's that Phil Jackson quote of the most we can hope for is to create the best possible conditions for success and then let go of the outcome. And that I live by that. Right. Even doing this, right. Let go of the outcome. Just let it be a conversation. Yeah. I start the races and I let go of the way it's going to be. I set up my health, I create the best possible conditions. And then I hope that it goes well. And for me, it's, I go back to the grit piece. How do I compete for my best health? How do I compete to raise the most amount of money? How do I compete to stay in awe of what it is that I'm doing? Because the second I lose the awe, the second I lose my why, I won't be able to keep doing this. And that powering of possibility, which I now link directly to what BRI is doing, as well as what I'm able to do. I mean, I never set out to do 50, never set out to do 100. Although if anybody who was with me after the 50th is listening, never ask someone after the 50th if they're going to do 100. Give them a minute. Give them a minute.
Yeah, don't ask me because I'll always say yes. Because
It's like, let me just enjoy this one first.
I know, I'm a sucker for those kinds of challenges.
But it's, I have gotten really good at being comfortable, being uncomfortable. I almost now, probably at this point in my life, need to get better at comfort because I'm out of my comfort zone so very often. And yet that's where so much of the victories come from. That's where so much of the growth comes from. And I'm incredibly grateful for that. And I would say if I were to offer one last piece of advice to autoimmune patients and their people, their teams, is, especially for those of us in it, is have grace for yourself. You're doing the best you can.
Yeah.
And that's hard because it's so easy to be hard on yourself, and the world around you can be hard on you.
Yeah.
And when we're going through this tough stuff, like it doesn't have to be a perfectly productive day every single day, and have a little bit of grace for how moody you can get being frustrated with a diagnosis journey, or grace for yourself when you're just not feeling your best, or grace for just whatever's coming up. And if that is that balance of grace and grit, I think is key.
Actually, I think that's really good advice for everyone.
Yeah.
Have a little bit of grace for yourself. And right.
Absolutely.
For those of us struggling with whatever, and it could be imposter syndrome. It could be a very disruptive childhood. It could be struggling in their job or with a purpose or whatever that is to have some grace for yourself. It's hard to remember on those days, right?
It's my screensaver.
Is it? Maybe that's a good place. Gretchen, where would folks, you mentioned a lot of sites.
Yes.
Talk a little bit. Folks want to find more about this. How would they find you?
So my social media, Twitter and Instagram is at Run Grateful. And for my work, which actually is now, I've married everything together, my professional background and my running connection. So finishlinemoments.com. And then what I can do is I can send you the Just Giving page for the 2 halves, 2 coasts, 2 days. Yeah. Because we're actually doing this is the first announcement of it. Operation Shooting Star is doing a matching gift starting between Monday and Global Running Day, which is June 5th, when I'll be in a particular conference in Omaha. And they're doing a matching gift up to $1,500 to help continue to raise the money for. And then I guess the last website would be Benaroya Research Institute, especially for folks who want to know more about the powering of the possibility of preventing, predicting, reversing, and curing autoimmune diseases.
Yeah. That's great. I'll provide all of those in the show notes. Again, theaverageguy.tv/HGG609. In a lot of ways, Gretchen, I think about I've done 609 of these podcasts. Like,
that is wild. I love that.
Crazy.
That's awesome.
And about 300, I started asking the question, like, should I keep going? And you come to a night like this and you record it and you're like, yeah, absolutely. If I hadn't gotten to 608, we couldn't have done 609. So thank you thanks for being a part of this tonight. Thanks for being my friend and hanging out with me from time to time as we get together online and just chat. I always appreciate it. Thanks for telling your story and being vulnerable enough there's a lot. Listen, this isn't easy for everybody to come out and say these kinds of things. For you and I, we'd say it at the drop of a hat. Anybody who would listen, we'd be like, oh yeah, let me tell you about my prostate. And they're like, I'm already uncomfortable.
Yeah. Right? No, absolutely. I mean, look, and it isn't for everybody. I mean, I have people who are no longer in my life that called me damaged goods because of my health stuff. Yeah. And you just have to be a bit discerning. And I'm so grateful to be here with you all. And I know it's a different conversation than you might necessarily have had. And and I appreciate the audience and everybody here. It feels like we've got to tell these stories so that more people feel seen and heard. And the one tie to gadget that I'll give you is awesome. I still run with the old school, very square iNano.
Really?
I'm a minimalist. Like, I don't run with a ton of stuff. It's the tiniest square in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. A little round circle and it's got a headphone, plug it, no Bluetooth.
That's it. It just clips in and that baby still works and I guard it with my life.
Wow. What are you going to do when the battery goes on that thing? They could last forever.
It's called eBay. I've already bought a couple of backups. They're a lot more expensive now than they used to be, but they work because I'm not doing, So but I really appreciate this, Jim. You are a gem and I appreciate our friendship and I'm so glad we've had a chance to do this. It means a lot.
I agree. What'll be interesting is I'll get a couple emails next week. We'll release this on Saturday. And they'll be like, you know what? That wasn't the typical thing, but thanks for talking about that because I had a family member or because my spouse or because my, fill in the blank. And that's the great thing about doing this is I can do whatever I want. Right.
609.
609. Uncle Marv checking in and says thank you. So
thank you for listening.
Gretchen, thanks for doing that as well. Gretchen, can you hang tight 1 second as I kind of close this thing up? Yeah, a couple reminders on the way out here. One, of course, this program only works because of Maple Grove Partners. Get secure, reliable, high-speed hosting from people that you know and you trust. That's Christian. He was on a couple weeks ago. He does a great job of making sure the lights stay on here, at least on the hosting end of things. Check it out today, maplegrovepartners.com. If you want to join the most friendly Discord group in the world, that's ours. Head out to theaverageguy.tv/Discord. And then you can leave a message for me, although I like emails, jim@theaverageguy.tv. You want to comment on this? I'll probably read it next week. I'm trying to think here. Rich Hay is joining here next week. The week before the summit. I get to see you the week after that, I think, which is going to be awesome.
Yay!
Rich Hayes joining me next week. We're talking a little bit about these new telescopes that have all this computer stuff in them, which seems pretty cool, right? I mean, there's never been a cooler time with all the solar eclipses and all that stuff going on. So Rich Hayes coming in next week. We'll get those emails read while Rich is in. So send those to me, jim@theaverageguy.tv, or head out to homegadgetgeeks.com, and there's a little record button, 30 seconds. Leave a message for me. We'll play it on the show. We are live every Thursday, 8 p.m. Central, 9 Eastern, almost every Thursday. Gretchen, I'm taking, when you're spending time with us in Omaha, I take that week off. So
good.
No Home Gadget Geeks that week, the week of the 6th. But we are live every Thursday, 8 p.m. Central, 9 Eastern at theaverageguy.tv/live. Thanks for listening. For those of you listening live, there'll be no post show. But with that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.